Well, thank you for the question. Here at PRB, we also do population projections, just like the UN, and we see a similar trend in the future. In respect to your question, it's true that the pace of population growth is declining because fertility rates around the world are declining. But what we call, there's so much population momentum, that is to say there are so many people in younger age groups, that even though the population rate of growth is declining, the total population is actually continuing to increase. And that's the way it's going to be for some time, not only till 2030, but really looking out possibly through 2050 and even farther down the line. So we're looking at an increasing population. Our forecast for 2050 is nearly 10 billion people in the world, despite lower fertility rates and lower growth rates. A very large percentage of the increase, in fact, more than 50% of the increase, will be in Africa. Africa is one part of the world where fertility rates are declining at a much slower pace than they have in other parts of the world. Even though Asia has the largest total population, their fertility rates have declined fairly substantially. For example, in China, the largest country in Asia and currently the largest country in the world by population, the fertility rate is so low that in fact their population is forecast to decrease between now and 2050. And in India, which is the second largest, is actually going to become the largest population in the world. It's also decreasing, but they have enough momentum to have a little more increase. Sure. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? Future growth of the population really depends fundamentally on how many children people are having. The fertility rate. In some countries, it still remains very high. For example, the highest country in the world, the highest rate is in Niger in West Africa, where women have an average of 7.5 children per woman on average. That's an amazingly high rate. By contrast, in some European countries, particularly in Eastern Europe, the rates are so low that we're forecasting very large declines in population in those countries. For example, Romania, which has about 20 million people now, we're forecasting by 2050 they'll only have 14 million people in the country. So it really varies country by country. But overall, as I mentioned before, given the fertility rates that we have now, they're not falling fast enough to really trigger a decline in global population. And that's not likely to come along for many, many years. That's a very good question and a very difficult question to answer because it really comes down to what's known as carrying capacity by the Earth. There have been a lot of forecasts in the past, Malthusian forecasts saying that when we got over a certain level, we wouldn't be able to sustain it on the planet. What is becoming clear, however, that with issues like climate change, global warming, the depletion of resources, a lot of people are starting to think that we're getting to the point where resources are going to be depleted much faster than they can be replenished. And in that sense, it does raise the question of whether or not we're reaching kind of a threshold. Of course, a lot of that also depends on innovations. Are we able to come up, for example, with new types of energy sources that are renewable, that can cut down on our use of resources? Can technology find other solutions for food, for example, which is becoming scarce in some places? So we're optimistic that men and women will be able to find solutions. It's just a little unclear right now what they're going to be. Thank you.